Thanks everyone for joining us today. Today's webinar, we're going to be talking about building trust and competitive advantage and the value of privacy certifications. I'm looking forward to the discussion, so thanks for being here with us. Let me start by introducing myself. My name is Noël Luke, and I'm the Chief Assurance Officer here at TrustArc, and I lead all of our assurance programs here. It's good to be here. And I have with me
Hi, Noel. I'm Kate Barecchia. I am VP and Deputy General Counsel over at Imperva. We are a cybersecurity solutions provider.
Wonderful. Thanks for joining us today. We are not providing legal advice. All right. So here's what we're going to talk about today. I do want to have a note just on terminology. So the word certification is in some regulations, it has a specific meaning. When we're talking about it here, I'm going to be using it more colloquially, but really I'm talking about all of our assurance programs. However, assurance programs doesn't roll off the tongue quite as easily as privacy certification. So that's what I'm referring to here. Just a note on that. To start with, I want to talk about sort of where does a privacy certification fit into the landscape of a privacy program. And one model is, where you do the sort of build, implement, demonstrate of your privacy program. So first you build your program by identifying who in your company is maybe going to lead the effort to drive a privacy program or create it, who's going to be accountable for it, and what framework you're going to use to adhere to based on, either you can use like the NIST framework, or maybe you're using a particular regulation as your framework. There's different ways to choose that. The next step is then operationalizing that and making sure that your practices meet those particular principles that you're trying to adhere to. And once you've reached sort of a level of maturity, I would say even mid-level maturity, or you're on your way there, privacy certification is then a possible option for you to start to demonstrate externally or even internally the work that you've done to put your program in place. And of course, building a privacy program is probably never that clean, but that is sort of one model. But there's also sort of another way to use it, and I'll pass it to you, Kate, to kind of talk through that.
Yeah, sure. So sometimes you may have a business that thinks they might be more advanced than you think they are as their privacy representative. And so in my career, I've certainly seen that at some various different places I've worked. And so it can be effective to use a program like TrustArc certification program to highlight some areas that the opportunity may be there for the business to grow and improve. And finding those gaps through a third party can enable a better internal conversation, a less adversarial conversation than it might be if you were trying to drive the conversation alone.
Yeah. So does it help then to sort of highlight what those gaps are so that you can get resources and buy-in for that? Is that the idea?
Yes, and so the questionnaires that TrustArc presents ask some very detailed questions, and so they can be an effective tool to highlighting those gaps in a concrete and measurable way for the organization.
Yeah, I think that's a great use of it. So if you haven't, achieved that maturity, but you want to get there, certainly can be a tool for that. So let's then talk about, let's go to the next slide. Talk about sort of what that process looks like. And Kate has gone through that process here with us at TrustArc, so she'll be able to lend some insight from that perspective. Where we really start, first we of course scope a project and you identify the certification that you want to do. And we're talking about scoping. We're thinking about what parts of your business are going to be covered, because they're you can cover some and not others. There's like the model of employee data or customer data. You can cover different products. But once we scope that, then we can really begin the process. And the first process, which Kate alluded to already, is this questionnaire that we start with. What we've done is we break down a particular regulation into different pieces, so you can work to comply with it, in this way. So the first thing is that questionnaire, which is different principles. You're looking at transparency, security, accountability, et cetera, and the particular requirements of each. And I'd love to hear, Kate, like what was your experience with that? And yeah.
Yeah, so I might actually take a little step back. So I've undergone TrustArc reviews at more than one organization where I've been Global Data Privacy Officer. And each time before we have come to TrustArc looking for those services, we've had internal conversations because it's very important to define as a business what your goals are from the certification or attestation or other documentation you're going to receive. And those goals will largely determine how you scope the privacy review with TrustArc, because if you don't have a clear business objective, it can be very difficult to appropriately scope the privacy review. And then after you've scoped and you've aligned with TrustArc about what framework you want to enter, whether it's APEC CBPR or GDPR validation or APEC PRP, you'll be assigned different questionnaires, and their length varies from year to year, but also from assessment type to assessment type, and they ask very specific questions and require very specific evidence in response.
Yeah, that's a good point. There are sometimes work on multiple certifications for various reasons because they cover different things. We've tried to use our system to create some overlap where they overlap to reduce the amount of time towards completion, and that's a thing we started doing last year to make sure that you're not answering as many, so that we can find where those overlap. So once that's done, once you go through that process, collecting all the evidence and sort of starting to demonstrate, what our team here will do is we'll look at everything you provided. We're going to go through the policies or other documentation you provide and assess it against those specific requirements, and we're going to put together then a gap analysis, if you will, or what we call a custom action plan that's going to identify specifically for your organization where the gaps are that we've seen. And how was that process for you, Kate? Because I'm always on one end of it, but I am curious, like, how is it receiving that? Because it is an iterative process in some ways.
It is. Well, I'm fortunate because I'm paired with Mache, who is pretty fabulous. I've been paired with various different TrustArc team members over the years, because I think my relationship goes back now about 5 years. And Mache has a very collaborative approach. His feedback is specific, it is thoughtful, and Mache and I also have a standing weekly call. So the nice thing about that is that any issues that are coming up, like if I have a question, I can ask that question as I'm completing the assessment so that I can have a better understanding of, okay, what is this question asking? Like today I was working on a section of GDPR validation, and it was asking some questions about a DPO specifically, but then it was asking other questions that could be about a DPO or could be more general. So I was able to take some notes and say, okay, on my next call with Mache, I'm going to ask these questions. And by getting that real-time feedback, I find that it makes any remediation much less burdensome.
Yeah, and that's our goal too, is whenever we try to do an early scan to see if there's any big barriers that we see, because we know that those can sometimes take time, especially if they're something technical that needs to be implemented. We really make an effort to try and give you as much time as possible to do that. And I'm glad to hear that Maciek's been so good. He is very good at his job. So then once we complete that and that, we walk through the action plan, you've sort of put things together. We'll take a look then at the sort of finalized version, right? Then we're looking at all the evidence that you presented since then to see if it meets those gaps. And I mean, what has been the lift for you, Kate, if you don't mind sharing, like, has it been in terms of like what you've had to change or adapt or in your policies or anything? What's that been like?
So I would say every year there are new lines of inquiry or new areas of focus, which I understand evolve based upon regulatory guidance. Last year, or maybe it was 2 years ago, could have even been 3 years ago, we needed to amend one of our contracts to make sure that we were more adequately covering all relevant areas of law. But overall, walking into this, and perhaps that's because I had the advantage of having done this for so many years, I knew what it would take to get where we wanted to go. So I had been working with the business for probably 6 to 8 months saying, hey, what's your policy on this? Hey, what's your process for this? Do you have a documented SOP? I need to see it. And we are also highly audited. So we have ISO 27001, SOC, PCI DSS. And so in many ways, our business had a leg up because much of the documentation we would use has already been gathered for those.
Yeah, yeah, there can be some overlap there. Sticking with this, moving, the last stage here is once the sort of privacy certification has been achieved. But I wanted to take a step back, which I realized I didn't ask, which is why did you seek out a privacy certification in the first place? What was in any of those instances, what was your business goal?
Yeah, so when GDPR first came out, I was with another organization, and there was a lot of uncertainty in the market generally. And the uncertainty tends to increase depending upon the type of personal data you're processing. So in my role then, we had HIPAA customers in the US. We had HR, we provided an HR management system, and so we had a ton of employee data, right? And so customers are understandably concerned. The law is uncertain, and I encounter this both as a vendor to our customers and as a customer of our vendors. Lots of people can say that they comply with GDPR, but how do you really know? And so what having these attestations enables us to do is to say, hey, look, we take privacy seriously. At Imperva, we believe privacy is a fundamental human right, and we put that belief into action. And it's not just me saying that. We've done a deep dive with a third party who's extremely reputable in the industry. It's a comprehensive assessment, and we're pleased to share with you these letters of attestation. And we find that by sharing those letters, we're able to have a much more constructive conversation with our customers. So we're focusing instead on what their very specific concerns are, rather than, please tell me everything you possibly could do to comply with GDPR and share with me every internal procedure you have, which of course we wouldn't do because that would create all kinds of confidentiality issues.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's great. That leads us sort of into our next discussion, which is, if we can go to the next slide, is just sort of what is the ROI or the benefits of obtaining these? And I think you started to talk about that, right? Using it with other organizations. And I'm curious to hear, like, what has been the reception in your experience when you do have that attestation to show, let's say, other companies that you're working with?
Yeah, so again, that applies to me both as a customer and as a vendor myself. So when I'm in the vendor role to our customers, I find it can really help alleviate what are legitimate concerns, right? We're in the cybersecurity industry. We're handling people's most sensitive data. Our job is to protect that data. And so having this attestation can quiet the waters and really shorten the deal cycle. So instead of spending 2 to 4 weeks on compliance questions, we might spend 1 to 2. It's not an absolute, but overall, we do see contracting cycle cut down. When I see that a vendor of ours has gotten an attestation from TrustArc, I think to myself, okay, I know what that takes. So that gives me a lot of comfort. I might have specific questions that are outside of the scope of the attestation, but it overall, it also shortens the vendor onboarding cycle for us.
Yeah, I was at a conference or a workshop recently for the Global CVPR Forum, which is from the APEC, and there were a number of companies talking there about how they're spending a lot of time having to assess other companies, and those vendors are also having to get assessed by all these other different companies. And there's just a lot of time spent, I think, within companies right now assessing and reassessing each other, and going through that process. And some of them have shared that, they use certifications as a way to kind of shorten that process. So if a company has, let's say, achieved a TrustArc certification, they can sort of move to the next stage and just answer maybe some additional supplemental questions. But I think you're sort of calling that out as well as some of your experience in this constant sort of reassessing process that companies have to do with each other.
Yeah, the regulators want us to be doing assessments. Not every company can afford to hire an army of external auditors to audit all their vendors. And so it's reasonable, in my point of view, to say, look, they have an ISO 27001 attestation. They have a GDPR validation attestation. Am I supposed to go and redo all that work? It's extremely expensive for the counterparty, for me, and what do we gain in the end?
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's one good use of the certifications. I listed up there a few some other ones. Can we put that slide back up? There we go. So another one, and please tell me if you use it for any of these reasons. I know you went in with a clear goal, but what do we also see is just risk mitigation. And in this instance, I'm thinking of something specific. Sometimes there are companies who have been investigated, and as a result of that, do come to us to then demonstrate that they've taken seriously that investigation. They're actively cleaning up their practices, and some do it preemptively, right? They want to. Some companies, if they are collecting data that is more sensitive or puts them at higher risk, they want to have a second check to make sure that they're sort of using it in a way that meets those privacy requirements.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
Yeah. Another area is just for compliance. What we've also seen is there's a number of companies who have, maybe one privacy professional, if at all, in their organization, and they don't really have the resources internally to, really manage an entire program alone. And the certification is a way to focus in specifically on those different areas and almost give them sort of a guide to figuring out the compliance within their organization as they're doing it.
I think that's a really valid use case, because thinking back to 2018, when I first started my relationship with TrustArc, it was sort of a magical mystery tour of what does GDPR compliance really look like? How am I supposed to figure it out? And so part of the benefit of the relationship is that TrustArc is doing much of the heavy lifting to evaluate and identify the criteria that regulators are applying when they're asking questions or investigating, and we get the benefit of that knowledge. So every day you can always do a little bit better. And I think the assessments are a really effective way to do that.
Yeah. And one of the things I think we as a company benefit from in terms of just working on privacy alone is we do get to see a broad swath of how companies are implementing things. And we get this question often, especially if there's an area where it's it's unclear exactly how to comply with something, we often get the question of like, well, what are other companies doing here, you know? And it's been an advantage for us to sort of share that with our customers and say, because we also work with so many different industries, and sometimes an organization in one industry has hit on like a really good solution. And if we can apply that across and share that across with our customers and say, this is what we're seeing, I think it at least gives our customers hopefully some reassurance, like here's kind of what that baseline is for that particular requirement. Another benefit I've seen is a competitive advantage. There are some industries where I've seen, you know, competitors within an industry sort of look at what their competitors are getting, and then they will get it too, just to keep on track with those competitors. So that's another use case I've seen sometimes in very specific industries, specifically industries where, again, a lot of their business is collecting or drawing on that collected data.
That's very true. You know, every salesperson will use every advantage they have, and the attestations are a distinction, right? They are a competitive distinction, because when one company has been assessed and proven to be a compliant partner, that makes a difference in the sales cycle.
Yeah, we've seen that. And we work with companies too to do press releases or, provide you with some resources so that you can, demonstrate that. The last, and there are other benefits, but the last one I sort of put here was to transfer data. And we have some specific certifications that we do here. Well, I'm thinking about our APEC cross-border privacy rules, privacy recognition for processors, certifications. Those, if you look at some regulations, so for example, in Japan, they've included in their privacy law, one of the ways to transfer data out of Japan is to be certified to this particular program, the APEC CBPR program. And a couple of other countries have done that as well. Singapore, some countries outside of that wanted to participate, let's say Bermuda and Dubai, the DIFC. They also said, we want to recognize this certification because, again, at that London event I was at, there were a number of legislators, regulators who were either in the midst of drafting their privacy law or they have one already drafted. But their experience as well is that countries are having to sort of assess each other to get adequacy. And so they're having the problem too of like, they want to enable the companies within their marketplace to be able to grow economically and trade, and privacy is sometimes a barrier to that. And that APEC CBPR, which is becoming the global CBPR, is becoming global for that reason, because countries are also looking for a way for companies to, meet a baseline so that they can transfer around the globe in an easier fashion. So I think that's another sort of a trend in privacy certifications. Recently, the United Kingdom joined in on the global CBPR forum, because now that they're out of the EU, they've also shared that, they're looking for some business-friendly ways for companies to transfer this data so that they can continue to operate. So those are just some of the benefits that I've seen in my time here of how companies are using them. I don't know if you would add anything else to that, Kate, or...
No, I think that captures it.
Yeah. So let's then talk about what certifications we have available. And I'm going to ask you, Kate, if you're willing to share sort of what are some of the ones you've done in the past or that you've found value in.
Sure. So back in the day, we did Privacy Shield when I was at another organization. I no longer use that one now. I have done GDPR validation at more than one organization. I have done APEC CBPR, and I have done APEC PRP.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So I'm just going to quickly walk through them. The APEC ones that you're talking about, I sort of mentioned those. Those are primarily for cross-border data transfers in the Asia Pacific region. That is evolving. Later this year, we expect it to be the global CBPR forum for the reasons I mentioned, that countries are really trying to find something that can be used even beyond the Asia Pacific region. We've been an accountability agent for that program for about 10 years now. And there's a number of companies who use that as their transfer mechanism in those regions. We also have some law-specific ones, like the GDPR validation that you mentioned, Kate. We also have a CCPA validation, and that's primarily because those are, when they came out, were sort of onerous to have to comply with. And there's also, potential for fines, heavy fines, and some regulation there, or enforcement there. So we created those specific to those laws. We also have some digital advertising ones, and that's the EDAA. So that's specific for companies who are in the digital advertising space, if you hold one of those roles. And then Privacy Shield, as we know what it was and is, some companies still participate. Once the DPF is out, we will continue to provide that verification once that's finalized this summer. And then we have a few that we've created internally on the left-hand side there. First, we have the enterprise, and the enterprise certification is used for companies that are looking, again, for a baseline. If you're trying to, choose a framework to adhere to, you can use the enterprise to make sure sort of all your privacy bases are covered. And that will get you to, a level of compliance with a number of laws. Not full compliance with all the laws, of course, that doesn't exist. If it did, everybody, we'd all want that. But the next one there is the data collection. Again, that's for digital advertising in the US. And finally, international privacy verification was specific to companies that were withdrawing from Privacy Shield, but still had that data and were still transferred under that mechanism, and wanted to make sure they're continuing to protect it, since the Department of Commerce was continuing to inquire. So those are the certifications that we offer. If you want to hear more about our privacy certifications, you can use that resource there. Okay, what about ISO certification?
So we have ISO 27001, but savvy customers know that does not cover data privacy. It certainly covers security and other important practices, but it is not examining compliance with laws like GDPR or CCPA. And so for us, and I have found over many years that there is a differential value there.
Great. Yeah, that's a good point. They're often complementary in some ways. We get a lot of customers who have an ISO certification, but also then are seeking a privacy certification. So it says there's 27701, which is an addition on 27001 for privacy.
And that is a valuable attestation to have. Not all companies can get to ISO 27001 or to 27701, and TrustArc offers a space in between for companies who might not be able to meet the underlying 27001. Also, it's been a few months at least since I've looked at the 27701 criteria, but my recollection is that the TrustArc privacy questions are more comprehensive and also really angled to specific applicable laws. That's not to suggest that there's not value in ISO 27701, because I certainly believe there is.
Thanks, Kate. There's another question. What exactly makes the additional international privacy laws different from the privacy policy laws in each country where IAPP is issued? I'm not entirely sure I understand the question.
The laws of each country are actually very unique. We apply GDPR as the global data privacy standard here at Imperva, and that's because by complying with GDPR, you know you're complying with 99% of the world's laws, because none of them have truly approached the comprehensiveness of GDPR. And where necessary, we do national derogations if there are any unique aspects of laws, such as a localization requirement or specific contractual terms such as required by CCPA. But the IAPP is a privacy organization, but they are not responsible for implementing laws. So I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, that was great. Well, thank you everyone for attending. Kate, thank you for sharing your experience with us. It's always a pleasure to work with you and speak with you.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, have a wonderful day.